Howdy, howdy, Sudevil here, and welcome to some Master Engineer buff tests with artillery. Now, I'll probably do a number of tests with the Master Engineer because every test is different and it shows a different aspect of what the Master Engineer can do. So the very first test I wanted to do is I wanted to look at how effective the Master Engineer's buffs were, specifically ballistics calibration and the Prospector Spyglass, which is new, which is that plus 18% accuracy on just one cannon. I know he can buff multiple artillery and he can buff other things and he can even buff himself. But I just wanted to take a look at the difference. Now, this isn't the perfect test for accuracy, but it's reasonable because it's going to give us something. I'm basically going to test the cannon all by itself, the cannon with the Master Engineer, and his ballistics calibration buff, which lasts for 57 seconds. So I had to find something that could get to my cannon within 60 seconds, and also just the spyglass. And then I'm going to rank up the cannon to rank 9, give it 9 chevrons, and see by itself what it does. And the unit I picked to shoot against is quite small. It's a Green Knight, and he's reasonably fast. He can definitely get to our cannon in that 57 seconds so that we can get a reasonable comparison of the three abilities. And I picked him because he's ethereal and he has no armor, so any randomness due to armor mitigation will be very minimal. So that's kind of why I picked him. So I'll just go and show the basic testing technique, and then we'll just go to the spreadsheet and take a look at it. And this is one of those tests. Now, I did 7 tests per configuration. I probably, this could probably use 10 or 20, but I mean, it's going to give us a reasonable example. So basically, I start the battle, grab my Master Engineer, hit his buff. Now our cannon has the ballistics calibration and the Prospector spyglass. So basically, 48% accuracy and 20 reload skill, so it's reloading a lot faster. And I took my Master Engineer and I just turned his fire at will off and put him into melee mode, so he's not going to fire into that Green Knight. And and then I just let the Green Knight come into my line, and I stop the test basically when the Green Knight passes this line. So we'll just fast forward it, and I can show you where I stopped the test, and you can see right about there the buff has just stopped, and we can see how much damage has been done to the Green Knight, and the Master Engineer himself has not done any damage. This is just a buff test to see what that buff is doing to our single cannon piece in this one specific example. So we'll go to the spreadsheet and start looking at how I broke down the data, and we can discuss what the testing looks like. So basically the cannon cost is 800, Green Knight is 1900. Now the Green Knight has 75% physical mitigation, so other units like Kroq-Gar or Kholek, which are much bigger and don't have the physical mitigation, will take a lot more damage from a cannon. So take some of this data with a grain of salt. It's just to sort of understand the differential the buffs make. That's the important part, and it's a small target. So any target bigger than the Green Knight, the buffs and the cannons will actually generally do better. So what I looked at is the battles didn't all finish in exactly 60 seconds, but I just started them at 60 minutes, finished at 59. It's very close, so that I could get a very even DPS or damage per second. So I looked at the Green Knight's starting health, the Green Knight's finishing health, calculated the DPS, and then looked at the gold difference. How much, if I take his finishing health divided by his starting health and then multiply it through by his actual cost, how much gold did we take off the Green Knight in his single charge against that single cannon? And it was about 307 gold, around 7.5 DPS. Again, a lot of physical resistance. This is just an accuracy test. There are lots of other ways to test these buffs, but this is how I've done the very first test. And So the next test I looked at was, and I'll just go through the spreadsheet, there's no sense showing the test, they all look the same, was I took the Master Engineer and I just used his accuracy buff, which costs 155 gold, ran the and put in that 155 gold into the cannon cost, so I could take a look at that ratio, the gold ratio of the gold difference versus the gold spent to get that difference as a comparator. And with the accuracy buff, the cannon DPS went up by about 10%. Now this is why I think maybe you need 10 or 20 tests. It's not the perfect test, because you would think it would go up by a little bit more than that, but your accuracy gets better as the unit gets closer, etc., etc. But there's definitely an improvement. You could see a small improvement based on just using that accuracy, and it has some value. We only got an extra 31 gold, or 31, which would equal about an extra 31 gold per minute. So you'd say you'd need to be buffing 1 unit for 5 minutes, or 5 units for 1 minute, or something like that. But it depends on the unit you're attacking and everything else like that. If you were attacking someone like Kolek, you would get a lot more value out of this. But there's definitely a difference coming in on that charge of about 10% to the DPS. Now, then I tested just his ballistics calibration, which is the 20 reload speed and the 30% accuracy buff by itself without the 18% accuracy buff. And the DPS went up quite a bit. This is a pretty good ability. For the minute or 57 seconds it's active is actually very good. And we increased our damage per second by 36%, and our gold differential, we gained about 112 gold. So it's almost, you'd need to buff 1 unit for less than 2 minutes to get this gold, depending on what you're attacking. The gold ratio is definitely up, so really this ballistics calibration for that 1 minute is definitely worth it. And probably if you have 2 pieces of artillery or 3 pieces of artillery, this really would start pulling a ton of value so that you could wear down high value units as they came in. There's just no doubt about it. So the next test I did is I used the Master Engineer's accuracy buff of 18% and ballistics calibration together. And we saw actually a pretty big jump in DPS to 163% over just the cannon by itself. The gold differential went up to 195. The gold ratio went up just slightly, so it's overall slightly more valuable on just one cannon or just one artillery piece. If you, again, use more than one artillery piece, that value goes up quite quickly, actually. So really interesting, quite a big jump, and bigger than the 2 individually. And I would say that's because the Green Knight is a pretty small target, and hitting him at the very edge of the range is pretty valuable in terms of doing that damage, because you're only going to get 3 volleys on the way in when you have the ballistics calibration active. And then the very last test I did was with the cannon at 9 chevrons. So I ranked the cannon up 9 times. It comes out at a cost of 1,118 gold, and then looked at the DPS, and it went up 30%. Now, this is sort of a funny one, because if the cannon could hit the Green Knight on the first volley and stagger him, the cannon with 9 chevrons got in 3 volleys instead of 2, and obviously the DPS went way up. But if the cannon didn't hit, you'd only get 2 volleys. So interestingly enough, for that minute that the ballistics calibration is active, it seems to be more effective than having a artillery piece with 9 chevrons just for that 1 minute. Obviously an artillery piece with 9 chevrons is going to be continuously getting all the bonuses from ranking it up, so will be more valuable than that lone skill all by itself. So pretty interesting data on just the buffs. And I mean, you can see the gold ratio here is only 0.36, and that compares to 0.38 and 0.35 of the basic cannon. So it looks a little bit like the gold ratio goes down a tiny bit. We know from some of the old testing we did, and well, I don't know how chevrons affect cannons specifically now, but they're generally a pretty good value, good place to put your chevrons. So interesting test. And that's the first set of tests. Like, I have a number I want to do, but again, I just want to get more testing out more frequently so that you guys can look at this, and we've definitely had some requests in the comments for this sort of testing. So pretty interesting. Ballistics calibration is definitely valuable if you're going to be bringing artillery, and it always has been. It's, this has not changed, but with the addition of this Prospector Spyglass for 155, it really does up that value significantly. They add up quite nicely, and they might be multiplicative instead of additive. Like, it might not be 48%, it might be more like just over 50% accuracy if they multiply through. I'm not really sure. I think they actually might, but anyways, interesting test. I'm going to do some more testing on the Master Engineer on his own shots. We did the Master Engineer versus the Master Engineer, where he's definitely more accurate, and that extra range is going to help him out in a whole lot of situations and make him more valuable just for at his base price of $750 with no buffs. And we have this entrenchment, which definitely has some value, and the extra powder, I don't know, it's very cheap. Like, if you were running flame cannons, this could be quite useful with the armor piercing explosion and the 10% explosion value. For that 75 gold, it could be worth it. And maybe I'll eventually do that test, but I wanted to get my very first test out with looking at the ballistics calibration and this Prospector Spyglass, which is new, against a small target, and so you guys could see it. So I would absolutely love to hear some comments. I love comments, and I'd like to hear more of the testing that you would like to see. Some of the things that I definitely want to do is I'm going to test the Grudge Thrower, because it's the least accurate of all of the dwarf artillery pieces. So looking at that buff with the Grudge Thrower will be useful. I definitely want to test the Master Engineer with some missile infantry at some point, and I also want to test the Master Engineer's just raw damage and kind of what he can do by himself when he is in a fight. So that's the testing for now. Hope you found it interesting. Love to hear some comments down below, and I will see you soon.